And I'm going to ask Ronjonette and our Francis to actually come on the camera and begin screen sharing, and we'll begin their presentation as well. And they're going to be talking about rethinking faculty well-being as a pathway to student success. So very excited for your presentation, Francis and Ronjonette.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just waiting for Francis to share the screen. I see it now. Thanks, Francis. I want to first just to thank Upswing for hosting this conference today. I think it is a really meaningful conversation. So with that, I also want to thank all of the attendees who have made themselves available, because it really does show that across institutions or any of your work that you have in higher ed, that we all recognize that there is an importance to really highlight this conversation. And quickly, before we introduce ourselves, I just want to do a lot of housekeeping just to let people know that we do not have a poll, but there will be some questions, some interactive pieces. So we want you to use the chat to respond, to add to the conversation, and just to give us your reactions to some of the material that we'll be sharing. And then the final piece we want to kind of lay the groundwork is that you're going to be hearing about a framework that we've used to really address faculty and staff wellness and well-being, but we're going to focus on faculty today. And then there's another piece of theory and conceptualizing what other theories that we've used here at Spelman College that we found to be helpful. So you'll see a divide a little bit in how Francis and I are having this conversation. So I will tell you a little bit about me quickly. My name is Dr. Ronjonette Obannon. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I am currently the Dean of Strategic Initiatives here at Spelman College, which means many different things. Previously, I was a director of counseling here, and academically, I have worked as an assistant professor of social work, both in undergraduate and graduate programs.
Good afternoon, y'all. My name is Frances Cloud. I'm currently the director of the Counseling Center here at Spelman. I'm a licensed clinical social worker with like over a decade of experience. I've worked in K through 12 settings, foster family agencies, as well as higher education where I am now. Just random facts about me, because I was like, hey, I'm more than just what I do. If you ever want to know, one of my hobbies includes photography, but I'm really big on just making sure that we're working in an environment that we can prevent burnout, and how do we set up the system to actually help us to do the things that we love, do the things that we're passionate about, and working with the students.
So we want to make sure, because Francis and I are both clinicians. Oh, I'm sorry, Francis, it's still you.
No problem. So for today, as we go through our agenda for today, we'll talk a little bit about how students' needs, institutional demands, as well as systematic changes affect faculty well-being. We'll touch on how the toll of identity-based expectations or even the unseen labor on faculty creates that burnout or even disengagement. And we'll also talk about what limits faculty access to support. So whether that's through policy, structures, or even the campus climate as a whole. The last thing that we'll kind of touch on is the informed approaches that we were talking about. So how can they be equitable driven strategies to foster faculty well-being, so that in that way we can have collective healing for the institution.
So as we get started, as I was saying, Francis and I are both psychotherapists. We have a clinical background. And one of the things that I've noticed, whether that's in therapy or in a leadership meeting with staff and other administrators, is that oftentimes we're using the same terminology, but the way that we make meaning, the way that we define it can be different. And what that probably leads to, or what I've seen that lead to, is often a disconnect from what is being stated versus what is being interpreted. So we are going to start with defining some major concepts so we are all on the same page. So for well-being, The CDC states that well-being is a holistic state of overall life satisfaction and functioning that encompasses physical, mental, emotional, and social and occupational dimensions, the dimensions of the self. Well-being reflects how individuals perceive the quality of their lives, their interpersonal relationships, their own sense of purpose, what they are bringing to the workplace, rather than just the absence of disease or illness, which is why we really want to focus on well-being versus just wellness.
Yeah, and then just a little bit more about womanism. So womanism is rooted in Black women's lived experience. It centers around care, community, as well as justice. The term womanism was coined by Alice Walker, and that is really just saying that as a whole, we are committed to the survival of the wholeness of the entire people, and we focus on collective healing and community well-being. So knowing that we can't take ourselves outside of the community that we're in, or trying to only work on ourselves without looking at the different systems that we're a part of.
So where are we now? At Spelman College, one of our current institutional priorities, which is established and connected to our strategic initiatives and our pillars. Goal number 4 is to invest in our people, our processes, and to really encompass strategies to change culture. The culture that we want to enhance is making sure that we are responsive, that we are adapting, and that we have innovative programs and services for students, faculty, and staff. And the college has shown this commitment by making a committee to assess and look at all of the ways that we can make sure that our campus is a great place to work. So as you can see in this next slide, there are a number of bullet points here. We're not going to go through all of them because we do not have time. But in the chat, I want you to identify if there's anything that stands out for you in whatever your role is, whether you're a faculty member, an administrator, staff on campus, student leader, I'm not sure who we all have here. But does any of these themes, any of these bullet points stand out? If so, put that into the chat. If we're missing something, we also want to include that in the chat. And while you're doing that, I'm going to kind of put these in themes. So Francis and I have been working across campus, looking at data and getting focus group information from faculty and staff. And one of the things that you will see is that faculty is having a hard time feeling as though that their roles are overloaded. They're managing the teaching expectations. And I'm going to divide that with administrative demands as well, which is the advising, mentoring, grading papers, the research expectations, increasing pressures to show up for students who have either moderate or at-risk behaviors emotionally, which we have also called that other mothering, if you're familiar with that term. And this is really important because this often is set heavily on women and, of course, minoritized faculty who have these additional invisible burdens. The second thing that you might see is institutional gaps. These are structural gaps. Sometimes faculty have challenges around junior faculty, adjunct, not having any mentorship, and if so, that it's not structured. There's no compensation oftentimes for mentoring, whether that is monetary or service hours that is tackled on for tenure. Oftentimes, although there is outlines for the tenure path, they cannot always be really clear, and people have challenges about promotion, challenges about understanding about job certainties. And then there's the piece just around inconsistent supports, particularly around wellness and well-being. So we know that across campuses, across corporate landscapes, there's these conversations around doing, the best that we can for our employees and our students. So we know that there's a desire for wellness and well-being, but what we are finding is that institutions are having a difficult time in understanding, defining, and implementing well-being programming. And then the final theme is a deep sense of disconnect, of chronic fatigue. I have felt this the last 2 years. Faculty often feel like they're not seen or heard by leadership. They feel burnt out from all of these meetings using technology, showing up for students, unproductive meetings. And one thing that consistently has come up for us is unaddressed kind of trauma, stress related emotions related to the pandemic.
Yeah. And I'm just looking at some of the information from the chat. So a lot of people agree with what was on this list. And even as we're looking at this list, these are things that you're thinking about even before you get to the work of things. So before we even working or in the midst of working, you're also taking into account of these. Someone also mentioned the expectations increasing while support is decreasing. Unclear communication between various layers. Student center is commonly stated while many times put on the back burner. So it's like, once again, that shared definition, are we looking at it or defining it the same way? And having to do more with less. Those are some common things.
Thank you, Frances. So what's underneath all of this? I think that it's clear that we know that faculty burnout has a direct alignment with student outcomes. I was reading recent reports. Last year, we wrote an article for several different publications around faculty burnout. And some of the numbers that came out were really troubling. So for an example, the Chronicle of Higher Education reported that 6 out of 10 faculty members have reported feeling chronic burnout, right? Particularly when the researchers looked at minoritized faculty, that number jumped up to 70%. So what it tells us is that faculty burnout is not just an individual problem. It's not just a workload or I have a family issue. And it's not just the sole problem of HR coming up with new benefits and programs. It really is a shared experience and responsibility across the campus. And the research does show us that there's a direct link from faculty burnout, faculty disengagement with student disengagement and lowered student success and retention for students. So that is kind of what I want us to shape, is that this is not an individual issue. This is not by division. It is a campus unwell scenario that we have to look at and address from that structural way.
I was about to say, I give credit to Ronjonette. Anytime I'm in a meeting with her, she starts off by saying that our campus is unwell. So it's like, let's ground in that, and also normalizing that the feeling that you have is not just an isolated feeling, but it's something that she's heard. I'll let you speak a little bit more about it, Ronjonette, but something that she's heard in multiple different settings or conversations with individuals.
Yeah, thank you for pointing it out, Frances. I mean, I think you just spoke to it very clearly. Oftentimes when we're in these meetings, I think that we can look at all of the work that we do, we normalize outcomes and our students appear to be doing well. But Frances and I have had an opportunity as clinicians in a confidential space to really hear about the struggles that students are having, even if they appear to be doing well academically. And in this new role as the Dean of Strategic Initiatives and this priority around understanding wellness and well-being across campus, I was really able to get more insights from faculty and staff about the deep hurt and the deep, I'm going to use the word pain, of how chronic fatigue and feeling disconnected from the campus can manifest. So we do want to look at this from a structural piece, and our goal is to give you some insights about what we have done and what we hope that you can take away.
So you may ask yourself, like, we're saying all these things, we realize that there's studies on it, but what is actually getting in the way? So several things is kind of happening. We have negative cultural norms. So we're in a culture that overworking, being hyperproductive is being glorified. We tend to disencourage rest, setting boundaries, or even being emotionally honest with ourselves or even colleagues or supervisors at times. And many of those things of what we kind of, or what you all named at the beginning, is like, we have this uncertainty with job security. So how can I be vulnerable in a space where I'm not quite sure if my job is on the chopping block? Lack of resources, which some of you all identified. So one, if you all know, or if your college has readily access information to their EAP services, other mental health support, what is wellness programming looks like. Does your institution give you access to professional development? Are there certain tools that are set up to sustain the well-being of the individuals who are doing the work? Unclear policies and even leadership turnover. So when you have inconsistent messaging, shifting of priorities, or frequent changes in leadership, it makes it difficult to build that trust. It makes it difficult to know what would be the standard, or what are some things that people can tend to look for from an individual. That invisible labor, so being able to take on roles such as mentoring, or maybe you're even advising someone who's not on your workload or your caseload. However, they built that relationship with you. How does that get rewarded, or even is it recognized? And some other things includes the lack of data-driven accountability. So we have these institutions that are taking surveys, or they're doing these assessments, but then what are the outcomes of these assessments? How does these assessments impact the culture of the work, and how are changes being measured in progress? So those are some things that we're looking at about what's getting in the way of all these things that we're mentioning.
Yeah. And I want to just add one piece about the data driven accountability, because that is a major piece of my work, is that we have these duplication of systems. And oftentimes we are underutilizing the system, or we're collecting data where, I'm going to say, in an unethical way. We're pulling data from students, we're pulling data from the campus, as Francis mentioned, but then we don't really know what we're doing with it. So we're stockpiling data with no real intent about how to utilize that. That is not a transparent commitment to the campus about how we're using that information, and is also really seen in the data world, right, as an unethical practice. So we want to collect the data. We want to be consistent about collecting the data. We want to know why we're collecting the data. And we want to make sure that we're reporting in a transparent way to the campus and to our stakeholders about the impact that that data is actually making. So thank you for that piece. So the next slide is quickly around trauma-informed principles. I have been talking about trauma, I don't know, maybe the last 20 years now. And we've tried to introduce this model in a way of discussing whether it's policies, the way that we look at curriculum, the way that we set our schedules with students for classroom time, that the trauma-informed care framework is not just about an interpersonal relationship where maybe there was violence or some kind of war emotional response to it. A trauma-informed care model, for a lack of being very wordy, the way that I see it is really about kindness to the person. So we are looking at institutional kindness. How do we think about well-being from that perspective? So Spelman College, we created about a year and a half ago a committee that was focused on faculty and staff success and well-being. And this committee was both on student affairs and academic affairs side. And I had this opportunity to introduce this trauma-informed model to think about how do we incorporate this across campus. I will share that it was difficult because most people don't really understand like what the trauma-informed care model represents. So I wanted to bring it here today so we can quickly talk through it. You have a handout with this information, and the points that are underneath each principle, there is 6 principles that we'll highlight. It gives a demonstration either on something that Spelman has been able to implement, or this is something that I'm currently working on to get pushed through. But they're all initiatives that you can think about or add to of where your campus is at and what might work for you. So in the trauma-informed principles outlined, the first principle is safety, right? So we all automatically think about physical safety. We want to keep our campuses safe, but we don't necessarily think about the emotional and psychological safety of the faculty, staff, and the students. So one item that I'll just quickly hit on was establishing a boundary around emails. We have a VP, he likes to get up at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. and he'll just start sending messages. Initially, people were really kind of hyper alerted about that, feeling as though, well, do I have to respond to that? Like, why is he sending these messages so early? But there is within our division, and we're moving this along the lines, that there's a policy, there's an understanding that you do not have to answer those emails after 6 p.m. You don't have to answer those emails early in the morning before your day starts. But we also can respect that is sometimes how people operate. But we also have tried to implement like scheduling emails out for the next day. So we lessen the anxiety that new faculty may feel or new staff members may feel, thinking they have to immediately respond to an administrator. The second principle is trustworthiness and transparency. So we think about this from a higher education perspective and landscape. How do we operate with transparency and consistency to build what I like to call professional trust? Trust comes up a lot in our discussions of who trusts who and why they don't. Professional trust does not mean that I'm writing someone in my will to give them custody of my kids. Professional trust means that within the rules that we operate, in the roles that we operate, I am trusting that when I reach out with an email or need, support and collaboration, that my colleagues are going to be there to support me within their capacity in their role. And one way that we've done this is about sharing policy changes, so having meetings and incorporating what are the new policies, when is the timeline of how this will be implemented, and why is the policy being updated? So it's not all the time that we try to have committees where people give their input and their voices, which we do. It does not necessarily mean that every point will be taken into consideration of a change, because there's some parts of a policy that has to be, right? It's federally regulated. However, this is an opportunity also to explain why the policy is the way it is. So we're looking at openness, transparency, communicating, and building professional trust in a way of having more effective communication. Principle 3 is peer support. How do we foster mutual support and community connection? We've done this in wellness. Frances has done this in the counseling center with her staff. We have a monthly wellness walk and talk where there's maybe not high level of strategic work that needs to happen, but we're making updates, we're sharing innovative ideas. What we have found is that it actually works better than just being at the table in a cold office. People get an opportunity to talk about their families and what research they're working on, any issues that they're having in the classroom, get that type of support. And then we follow up with actually working times in which people get together, whether in person or in Zoom, to then implement any of those support services that we've talked about as we were walking. And the other piece is including faculty in the decision-making piece. I will admit this has been kind of a more challenging item to put in place, because there can sometimes be a divide between divisions, but practicing and showing people how you within a division can create this change, and then also working with the provost and seeing like how does these changes come more streamlined from an institutional pathway. So there's both a department piece, and then we bring in the whole structure with the provost in her office. And then there's collaboration, and we've done this piece around, having shared power, and not only in decision making, but where sometimes we struggle to show up in problem solving. And oftentimes there is a disconnect, as Frances mentioned, that we can get caught into institutions kind of doing the same thing over and over, because that is just the way that we've done it. It's been a long-term policy. And what I have found is a lot of things that we say policy actually is not. It's just a way that we have been doing the business. So we're inviting people in from other departments, having shared collaboration around tenure. And they have that shared governance around evaluations. There's a rubric that has been designed, and there is more of an equitable way across disciplines to pursue and help our faculty get through the tenure process. Empowerment, voice, and choice. It really is about prioritizing autonomy. We are living in a state right now where I think on campus, no matter what your role is, there can be fear about like what you can say. And if I can be transparent, there was a piece in Frances' PowerPoint that I didn't mention to her, but I was going to say, oh, I don't know if we can say this, or I don't know if we can say that. But I decided to not bring that to her attention and not to ask her to change it, because what she mentioned is a standard. It is something that we do here at Spelman around this womanism concept in theory. So the fear about not jeopardizing, not getting our institutions in trouble, although it could be embedded in your mission at like a HBCU, we're working now to kind of understand, how does autonomy of an institution, how does the autonomy in the work of individuals like faculty show up in this landscape where there's a challenge about, how much of your professional self can you bring to a public platform? And then this last piece that is here is around the cultural, historical, and gender responsiveness. And this piece is really going to take us into some of the work that Frances is going to highlight. But this is where we try to look at, how do we uplift and highlight our students? How do we uplift and highlight staff and faculty? And quite honestly, there was not an equitable way in which we were highlighting those three groups. Students who had an internship at the White House would definitely be on the website, but the student who is serving in the community in her education or teaching role or nursing may not have that same accomplishment highlighted. In the same time of looking at what is the difference between how we highlight faculty research and the research and the work of staff across campus. So instead of just having these individual divisions do their own award ceremony, we have been working with the president, and next year we'll be rolling out a campus recognition and award ceremony where individuals can have this equal platform of being seen, of their accomplishments being celebrated, and giving back the voice to our community to say that we are all one, we all belong, and that no role is more important than another.
So as we're looking at that, and touch base on all of those 6 principles, really looking at like, what are the barriers? So as we're still working on it, and as Ronjonette stated, it's like, these are things that we have identified. These are things that we're planting seeds for, and we're still watering it for it to grow. Some things have blossomed. Some things have the greenness of it has went away, but still the roots are there, so they still can be brought back. But as we're looking at the different barriers, we're social worker by trade, we're going to look at the micro, which is the personal things, the meso, which will compare that to the departmental things, and the macro things. So that's more so of the institutional part of it. On a personal level, like, we have to look at what that constant pressure to be productive, that pressure to be emotionally available, and even that pressure of being self-sacrificing. So what does that look like on the labor of yourself? So that goes for, as we stated earlier, when you're doing that extra mentoring, when you're not having that support, when you're doing all these things and being unrewarded, that can lead to burnout, that can lead to isolation, because it could lead a person to wonder, like, am I doing too much? Am I doing too little? I'm hearing all these things that this individual is doing. However, I'm not hearing about the toll that is taken on the individual to keep up with that certain level. As we look at departments, really seeing, like, our individual departments, are we normalizing people overworking? So are we normalizing people to do all these things, and we're setting an expectation, however, it's not recognized on the evaluations or even promotions. Some things that I implemented in my department was, one, because we deal with mental health, it's like having an actual set lunchtime. And I know it sounds wild and brand new and innovative. It's like, can we really have a set lunchtime? It's like, yes, because it got to the point where our clinicians were overworking themselves, not being present with students as much as they could, because they just wasn't feeding into their own selves. I remind my staff that, hey, by law, you have a 1-hour lunch break and you have 2 15s. What is something that you would like to do for yourself during that time? A part of our goals that we have on an individual level is when they come up with their annual goals for the year, we also think about what is a well-being goal that you would like here in the workplace. So then that way individuals can be able to I can support if there's some things that we need to move around in the department, we can do that. For institutional, we look at the lack of policies. So as you all kind of mentioned before, we have practices but no policies, expectations but no trainings, or even is the infrastructure there to continue with the whole overall well-being for an individual. Um, because overall, if we continue to ignore these things, and it takes an emotional toll on the academic labor of the institutions. So what does well-being look like? Most of the time when I'm in trainings or presentations, this is the part of the training where individuals give me like, this is your self-care guide. And I'm like, okay, I did these things, but what more can I do? So for this part of it, we want to talk about how can we look at it more so with the womanist framework. So my department and the counseling center, we're grounded in a womanist framework, and it's developed, or not developed, it's grounded in these 4 pillars. So how can we look at community over individualism, look at rest as a form of resistance, voice and self-definition, and cultural and spiritual grounding? So once again, going back to that womanism definition and saying that we're not working in a silo. We have to look at the community in order to have, for individual healing, we must have community healing as well. How do we disrupt the whole glorifying of being exhausted or overworking ourselves? And how can we honestly honor our own unique experiences, as well as making space and making sure that we give space for others to tell us about their own unique experiences? So some of the ways that you can practice this is through, when we're thinking about community over individualism, we're thinking about how many times have you actually gotten up and walked. Ronjonette mentioned that we sometimes have walking meetings, but walking, going across campus instead of sending that email, or even picking up the phone instead of sending that email, or doing it over Teams. So whether we have video chat easily or just being able to hear an individual's voice. Saying, how do we check in with a colleague that is outside of just work-related things of, did you get that task done? Or even asking someone, I know you volunteered for this, or do you need some help, or do you have the capacity to still do it as you intended? Maybe some things need to be shifted around. Taking a full lunch without multitasking. So being able to say, I ate my lunch without scarfing it down. That is a rare occurrence when I speak with professors, or even when professors say like, hey, I can meet with you. They're sacrificing their own individual time or decompression time in order to meet that need. Being able to set non-working hours. Sometimes when I say that to individuals, it's like, oh my goodness, I'm cursing at them, or I'm cursing at the individual. But it's like, how do you make time for the things that you enjoy? How do you make time to invest in your own self, or maybe your family or your community, without feeling tethered to something else? Being able to set a boundary in a meeting. So that may mean that, hey, let me get back to you. I need some time to reflect on this. Or even as I mentioned earlier, in the counseling center, we set our wellness goals for that semester. So being able to say, like, this is one thing that I want to do. So one of my wellness goals is, before I start my day, I like to just go for a 30-minute walk. If I go for an hour walk because I dropped my son off earlier, that's great. But at least being able to get outside of the office and not being stuck inside of the office. The other thing when it comes to cultural and spiritual grounding is, how do you set intentions in your day? So whether you do that through prayer, through music, a quote, or even in silence, but it's a way for you to reconnect with your own purpose. It's a way for you to say that this is where I am right now, and this is maybe I need to make some adjustments for the day of how I show up. So as we're thinking of these things, or even as you're thinking about how can you merge the womanist informed practices as well as the trauma informed practices, they go hand in hand, because it starts off with communication from yourself. What it is that you need for you, how is it that your community can help you out with that, and being able to provide some form of feedback loop for us all. for some of the things and some of the resources. So we touched base on that, but if you want to take it a little bit step further, I don't know if you all have heard of the NAP ministry. It's something that we've tried to incorporate with students here during reading period. Is like having a moment for rest. So you can look at some information on the NAP ministry, the Steve Fund, as well as the JED Foundation. They provide some more work when it comes to the mental health framework. So not only for students, but also for the campus culture. If you want some more information on womanism, then a book by Lee, I pronounce names wrong all the time, but The Womanist Idea, that book will be able to give you all some more information. And if you want to dive in a little bit into like just some of the studies that we mentioned throughout the presentation, you can. So just want to take some time to, I know that we giving you things to consider, things that you can potentially implement, but if you all have any questions that you would like to ask Ronjonette and myself.
Thank you both. I would encourage anybody, if you have questions, to put them in the Q&A and we can try to address them in the next few minutes. One thing I wanted to just kind of double click on a bit is the rest as resistance, because I think, that's something that a lot of us, based upon the conversations in the chat, are really resonating with. I was curious if you all wouldn't mind just talking a little bit more about how people in positions of leadership could model this for other members of their community in, possibly a transparent way to really encourage other folks to take time for themselves, especially throughout the workday. Would you all mind talking about that a bit more?
Go ahead, Francis, do you want to respond and I'll go after you?
Yeah. So my rest looks a little different. I say rest looks different for everyone. So sometimes people need that physically, I need to go to sleep types of rest. Or sometimes it's just like I need a different type of stimuli in the midst of me doing something else. So for me, my rest is getting out in the sun. So through that time, I have encountered people on my walk, and they're just like, "Hey, Francis, you're out again. You're walking." It wasn't just one time. It was like, "Hey, no, I need this." But I also say, like, I'm glad that I'm connecting with you right now, but I also need this time just to decompress before I start my workday. So I do take that moment to acknowledge, like, "Hey, I'm glad you see me. We see each other." But I'm still going to honor the time that I have, that I've dedicated to myself. And we can definitely reconnect. And that gives me an opportunity of reconnecting with someone outside of just a workspace. So being able to say, like, "Hey, I know I saw you earlier. Did you end up doing something?" Because 9 times out of 10, someone's going to tell me, like, "Hey, I also meant to do this, this, and that." So it also gives a way for us to establish some form of a relationship outside of just the work of it all. So seeing people on an individual level.
And I would add, I believe that one of the initiatives that Spelman has done really well, we have been talking about having a wellness day for years. For years. I cannot tell you why the wellness day was really difficult. There were a lot of different concerns around the academic calendar, taking a day away and then making sure that students had another day to make that up, which really took away from the whole point of it. But we have, our new president came in, and at the end of the semester, there was a wellness day that was placed on the calendar. And I cannot tell you what it means when leadership, when the top of, I call it the family tree, right? When the top of the family tree is then demonstrating to say, no, wellness and well-being is so important. We're going to shut down the campus. Students are gone, and we're going to find a way to make sure that faculty and staff have an opportunity to move away from campus. And then I'll just add, I think this is really important for leadership to understand, because oftentimes faculty members are, 9-month, 10-month employees. So they're gone for the summer, unless they're choosing to stay and teach over the summer. Most staff people, like in leadership, are 12-month employees. So just, if you want a day off, you have to then take a vacation day. So having leadership not only speak on well-being and wellness, But whether you're the president, the provost, or a director of your division or department, I think that we have the ability to incorporate how we're going to put wellness in, demonstrate it, and make sure that people have a day of rest or a moment of rest in whichever ways that you can do that within your constraints.
Yeah, and even with the well-being day that that the president put in place is like still having the VP as well as different department heads to remind you of like, no, this is a day that is given to you. This is a well-being day. Please don't schedule anything on that day. You're not going to meet with me on that day because we get so into the loop of saying like, oh, okay, I'll just meet with you. And it was on a Friday as well. It was like, oh, I'll just meet with you Friday. And it was like, actually, no, we're off that day. So that was nice.
It's great to hear. Thank you for sharing that. I think this question is actually pretty related, so I'm going to just read it out loud. It's how do you combat glorifying overworking and hyper productivity? Because at times I feel like that is the status quo.
Yeah. So I want to say a part of that, or Ronjonette, do you want to start
No,
off?
go ahead. I'll come back.
A part of that does involve having a space where you do feel safe to have some form of vulnerability. Meaning because in order to, you may meet or overexceed in an expectation or in an area. However, what is that emotional toll? That's the part that we tend not to talk about. It's like, I've gotten this done. I have all of these accolades. However, um, I don't tell like what toll that took on me. So one reason why I'm really big in that area is because I was working hard, I was doing some things, and I ended up with the shingles. And I always thought that the shingles was something that from the commercials someone 55 years and older got. And it was like, that's not the case. So being able to describe like, although I did this, what do I need to in order to recoup some things? Being able to negotiate your time of like, if you have this expectation of me to do this part, can I also asking for what you need, right? So saying like, if you want me to do all of these committees, what are some things that I can now take off of my plate because I just don't have the bandwidth to do all the things in the same capacity that you're used to me working?
And to quickly add to that, in my leadership classes, what I think really works is when a leader has the ability to be vulnerable and transparent about where they struggle at. So I teach students who are taking social work leadership courses to do a self-assessment. And the self-assessment is around your own values, it's around your own insecurities that, of course, as leaders or managers, we often don't speak out loud in our community. But for me, I've talked about how I've really struggled with, for most of my life, that the identity of being seen as a person who gets things done is really important to me. And I've also recognized how that identity has pushed me closer towards burnout and chronic exhaustion, even when the task or the person who was tasking me with that, whatever that agenda item was, that was not their expectation of me. That was something I had internalized, and that had become an identity for me. So I think that leaders should find a way to, engage in one of these leadership assessment tools. Kind of think about like where your strength is at, what are some of your challenges, and how does your identity of what it means to be a hard worker, a good worker, how does that show up not only for you, but also in the way that you run your department? And getting feedback from your staff and being open to hearing what people have to say and not internalizing that from a negative way. I think that is a way that you are able to, one, self-assess, self-reflect, because everything starts with the self. And then two, think about what are the changes that you're willing to make for the better good of your department, but also your institution, and work to implement those different strategies that places boundaries on yourself. So therefore you can offer a safety community for your staff in which they don't feel like they also have to show up in a way of overproducing and overworking.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again so much for your time. I know we have one other question, but I do want to make sure that we're able to have our 5-minute break before our last session of the day. Going back to that rest as resistance piece. For the folks that put that question in there, if you would like to email us at Upswing or message us here separately with your email address, we can maybe follow up with Ronjonette and Francis separately to get that information over to you. Wonderful. And I see that they have their email addresses here. If you want to just ask them directly, I'm sure that they would love to provide more information. But thank you again so much. I appreciate it. So we'll have you just stop screen sharing, and then I am going to attempt to play something on my end. We'll see how that goes.